Hey guys, welcome back. We got a podcast here, Macarena, and I don't want to butcher this, but Macarena Bianchi. She'll kind of either correct me on this. She is the CEO of Spark Social Press and a transformative mindset coach. She has a background from Whole Foods and their corporate side, but I want her to share basically the reason I'm having her on is because her mindset and what I've kind of seen, just some of the content she's put out is really kind of line with what a lot of you guys are requesting and that we've been discussing. So we'll get right into it. Hey, Macarena, how's it going in Miami? Yeah.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We are in sunny, rainy Seattle. It is always sunny in our minds here, but today actually we have an overcast day. So for the end of October, that's pretty good. How's the weather down in Miami today?
It's a cold front, so it's
Yeah.
like 80 degrees and absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, the hurricane we were discussing, you guys missed it, lucked out. I have other friends in South Florida, and yeah, so I'm glad you kind of made it through. I'm sure your mindset powers obviously played a role in it going the other way, right?
Oh, it's so sad. It's like a heartbreak when it lands anywhere,
Yeah.
especially when people are not prepared. I cannot tell you how many friends I know that moved to Asheville, North Carolina from South Florida to get
Mm.
away from storms, and they ended up taking them with them. So it was so sad. So anytime this happens, it's a huge tragedy, and we're lucky this time, but we've been unlucky before. Like I was around through Andrew, which was a category 5 that hit us, and that was very, very, very traumatic.
Yeah, so you moved to Miami when again? How old were you?
Oh, I got to Miami when I had turned 8 years old
Okay.
in 1982, a long, long time ago.
Yeah. So your wisdom is definitely obviously had some time to develop, of course, right?
Gratefully.
Yeah. Well, yeah, obviously we could discuss weather all day long, but I think the reason a lot of people want to hear us is discussing a little bit about what you've done with your company and maybe your journey. But give us a little background on what you've had going on the last few years and maybe that transition from corporate because it's a big change, and I think that's kind of one thing I've seen is it is quite a transition that people do from corporate. It's a complete mindset to maybe be full time in your business, like I'm assuming you are. Share a little bit about the journey, Macarena.
Sure. I think, entrepreneurs we're so good at the art of the pivot
Mm-hmm.
as things happen. We have to flow. So I love working. I'm a recovering workaholic, and I remember being a kid once I figured out, oh, I can be out of my house and they give me money and I get to do cool stuff. Like my first job was at a record store. I think we called them CD shops. And the reason I got that job there was so I could get great concert tickets. So I understood that there was some power in positioning from very, very early on. And then from there, I actually had almost of a double life. I got to work in marketing and for things like Nicole Miller. I got to work in fashion in the heyday of Miami Beach. And I also worked for events. So I got to work the front door at like the coolest clubs back in the day. And it was a blast while I was an undergrad. And then I finally left when I went to grad school to study film. I was a filmmaker in Los Angeles. And that's when kind of I realized later on that, oh my God, I don't know how to take breaks. So that kind of showed me my workaholism. Like, ooh, it's kind of difficult for me to stop. Like, I love focusing, I loved being in the flow, and I hated getting interrupted. And I always had, no matter what job I was doing, there was always like books I wanted to write. That's one of the cool things about California and Los Angeles is the creativity. Everybody's creating something, working on something. And I was very happy doing writing. I was writing courses for copywriting. I was part of a team, and that was going fantastic. And then my mom got sick. So sadly, this was already a long time ago. This was in 2008. So it was already, it was a good time ago. So she got sick, and I came to Miami for 2 weeks, and it's been 16 years or something. So I came here because they had given her about 6 months to live. So I said, I'm not going anywhere. And I got writer's block. And I was like, okay, I had to produce like her event and be available. So I did that for a while. And then once that was done, it was like I had to like work. I had to go do something now. And it was 2008, like after the crisis, there I am with like two bachelors, a master's degree, super overqualified, but I needed a simple job. I just wanted someplace that it was pleasant to be around. And I ended up at Whole Foods. I started as a grocery person. I think it was like $10 an hour. And I had gone from making like thousands of dollars a day to getting a $10 an hour job. So a big shift. And it was a wonderful experience because it helped me really ground. And I said, it doesn't matter who I've been. Right now, I need to be here. I need to be close to my mom. I need something easy to do and community. I need to create community other than just like managing my mom's illness. So I went to work at Whole Foods, and then within 6 months, I was a marketing director. So that went really fast. It was a fascinating experience, and it allowed me a wonderful community to give as far as leadership was concerned. I had a wonderful team. I got to really help people in their career. It was a wonderful experience for me, and it gave me time to get past my grieving. So my mom, she lived for 2 years, and then I was there for about 4 years later. And finally, the reason it was time for me to leave, it was really kind of interesting how it happened. I have people in my life, like my brother, who's way more conservative. I'm way more in the adventurous side. So he was like, when I told him, oh, I want to leave, I need to do something else, he was like, are you out of your mind? You're a rock star there. Like they love you. You have a great team. Like, why would you do this? Like, why would you destroy your stability? And I was like, as he's yelling at me, what I'm hearing is you're care and you're concerned about me. Yet I feel like I'm suffocating. Like that's how it hit me. And people don't realize like discomfort is trying to tell us something. If things are easy, then why would we change? Why would we expand? So it got to the point where I felt like I was suffocating. And I was like, wait a second, I have ambitions. There's things I want to do. There's books I want to write. So that's when I realized, okay, it's time. And it coincided with me turning 40. So I gave them 6 months notice. I got my replacement. I did it thoroughly. And it was really interesting that my husband, we used to talk about how everything takes longer than you think. We talk about how people say, oh, overnight sensation. There's no such thing. There's usually 10 years of work, for when we see people be really successful. We're like, where did they came from? No, they've been working at it for a really, really long time. So I was lucky enough to be in a situation and I had support where my husband said, do it now. It's going to get harder the more you wait. So start making the transition. And it was absolutely lovely. I remember to get like re in touch with my creativity as like a transitional thing. I did the book. I love these books that are kind of like workshops or therapy in a book. I did The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, which is a wonderful book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but she talks about going on artist dates and the AM journaling, which I'm a big fan of. And it's really great because I also agree that everyone's creative. I think that's one of like my the secret powers is being able to connect and be a human and have creativity. So this book helps people tap into their creativity or rehab it if they like shut it down for whatever reason. So that was really instrumental. And then I wanted to kind of do everything like I always want to do. And I started something called the Spark Social Show. And that was a lot of fun. I think it led later on to doing like my magical mindset podcast and things like that. So I started off like playing around, and I always wanted to do everything. There was books I want to write, and what was cool is my publishing journey was really interesting. So I wrote a poem about gratitude in 2006 that a lot of people loved, and I never thought of myself as a poet per se, but I had such a wonderful experience and mindset shift just with my personal gratitude practice that I was like, this is so simple. Why aren't we, playing with it more? So I wrote that poem. And then from then on, my husband was in flowers at the time. So years later, so I met him in like way after that. So this was all before the pandemic. He said to me, "Oh, I love your gratitude poem. I need one for Valentine's Day." Okay. I need one for Mother's Day. Okay. So that's kind of how it happened. And next thing you know, so the pandemic was about when the pandemic happened. And before that, I was making courses, I was doing coaching, but I hadn't really like focused on the books. And the pandemic, since we weren't seeing people, really allowed me to create a lot more books. And there was a lot of, yes, there was the pandemic happening, but we had my stepson had a terrible illness. My house, we were problems building our home. Like we had a lot of issues, a lot of things that were pulling focus. So I couldn't fulfill my fantasies of writing long form books, but I figured out how to do short ones, which are my poetry books and then the Grateful Giraffe series that I did for children. So luckily, I mean, the pandemic kind of really helped me reset and just focus on the books. And then the funny part was, yes, I had to create my company. I had my company, Spark Social Inc., but then I'm like, okay, let's do a DBA, Spark Social Press. Let's pivot to just focus on the publishing. So I figured out how to be a publisher. And next thing you know, I had 16 books, but I still wasn't thinking of myself as a publisher. Now I have around 40 of them. But back then I had a booth at book the Miami Book Festival. And I remember coming in, and I had a team of people, and I had, bringing in my carts to set up. And then they're like, "Oh, okay, which company are you?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm just in Writers Row." And they're looking at me like, "What do you mean you're in Writers Row?" "I'm a writer. I have books. I'm in Writers Row." They're like, "No, no." He's like, "That's for people who have one book." They're like, "How many books do you have?" At the time, I'm like, "I have 16." She's like, "You're a publisher. Let me put you in this area." And that's when it hit me. This was a few years ago. I was like, "Oh, that's right. I've become a publisher." So it was interesting how it just developed and took a life of its own, and spent a lot of time with development, like product development. And between when I started and now, beautiful advancements have happened in printing, especially print on demand. Like my books are really high quality because they're full color. So even though they're available everywhere books are sold, but Amazon's printer, color printer has nothing on like my printer, like out of the UK. So where I sell my books in like my Shopify store, for example.
So yeah, I wanted to get this could go a different direction because a lot of folks on our at least in our channel, different social media that are getting this, they're entrepreneurs. They're looking to become entrepreneurs of some nature. And I'm glad you went down this author route because I think that's something that scares someone, Macarena, about getting just writing that first book. Obviously, there's these AI tools that have made it easy just to get the ball rolling, right? How does someone get over the fear of just getting writing that first book on whatever it may be? Obviously, there's so many people, they want to share their story. Obviously, a lot of people do it through social media, but I think when you write a book, you now become somewhat of an authority, and that obviously grows there. So talk about talk about the fear of writing your first book, but also maybe the necessary steps it takes to obviously get it actually out there, part of the marketing, because you're right. Obviously, doing 16, you've really become an expert in that area because it takes a lot of work to write one book as it is, right? Yeah, share a little bit about that.
Sure, I have a lot of ideas and a lot of suggestions for this. It's really important not to be too precious about it. And sometimes people feel like, so there's the therapeutic art of expressing yourself. So I think that is really, really important. But maybe the book that needs to be written is not the book that needs to be shared.
Uh,
So whether you work with a counselor, a therapist, a life coach, whoever it is, where you're expressing and one of the things I talk about with my mindset clients is everything needs to be workshopped. So you have to get to a point where you can talk about things where the wound has healed. You know, a friend of mine says that, Jen Gottlieb, she says, you can't talk about stuff if your wound hasn't healed. So that's really, really important. Like, are you writing this book for you for therapeutic reasons? Are you doing it really to be of service to others? I think that's a big thing. And write the therapeutic book. I mean, I think that's really, really valuable to do regardless. Everybody, I believe, should write down their life stories because you know, there's so much, everybody's so unique, everybody's so magical that there is beautiful things there. So whether you use them to connect with people or just to have, I think there's a huge value in this. But once you decide to do a book that is not for personal reasons, that's to like showcase your work and help others, then I think there's a few things to remember. One of them is you're not writing a dissertation, right? It doesn't have to be the end all be all. You have to give yourself permission. I like what really freed me up is the idea of instead of writing the book, why not think of writing little books? So I started by writing little books. I'd written screenplays, I'd written nonfiction stuff, but I started writing these little books, these poetry books, this lighthearted, empowering poetry. And it freed me up. Like, okay, they don't have to be something that takes forever because that's the other thing is the time commitment. You know, I used to be a film producer, used to work in film, and producing movies takes so long. It takes so many years. People ask me all the time, like, what do you suggest? I'm like, I suggest you do commercials because you can have a life and you can be a human and you don't have to just like be working 24/7. So if the same principle applies here, you're not writing the Bible, you know, you're not writing an encyclopedia. You're, you know, what is your point? How do you want to communicate that? And then just do it. And then writing is rewriting. Most people don't realize that. And then you have to use whatever works for you. Like some people like dictation. So they'll speak and then record it and then they can have somebody edit it. So there's so many ways to go around it, but the hardest part I find is not the idea. Sometimes the hardest part is having the focus to actually work. So instead of, you know, I would love to have like 4 hours of uninterrupted silence to work on my books, but it usually does not happen. So here's where something like the Pomodoro technique, the authors call it writing sprints, where you set the timer for 20, 25 minutes and then you just focus on writing. So what I would recommend for first-time authors is give yourself permission to be terrible. Your assignment is to write a terrible first draft as quickly as possible because most people are trying to write a masterpiece, they keep editing and then they never get it done. So you have to get it out. And then once it's out, you can finesse it. And as you're doing that, you're going to remember things and you're going to, you know, so writing is rewriting. It's not linear. So you need to get it out or figure out, okay, I'm very prompt based. So with an outline, if I know the structure, boom, I can just sit down and write. It doesn't matter where I am, if it's loud, if it's quiet, whatever. If I know what my point is, I can just do it. But then how do we know it's done? It's because when I take time, I go live, I go do something else, I come back, I read it. If nothing jumps at me, I'm done. I can move on. So that's what I would say is Your assignment is to write a first draft as quickly as possible, get that out of your system. Then you finesse it and give yourself permission that you're not, you know, nobody writes perfection on a first draft. And when I say it takes a lot of drafts, I'm saying like 15 drafts. So so the first draft is sometimes the hardest part for people. But once if you can get that out, then you can correct anything, and then you want to like step away and think about it. It's a process.
I'm so glad you said perfection. How this is, yeah. I'm just so big on that word. Um, being it can be just an enemy of anything we're doing. Correct. Um, eh, just with all different types of tasks. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in obviously getting out there, getting obviously sometimes throwing the dirt on the wall. It depends on the task. But I think at the end of the day, what it kind of comes down to, at least for maybe people that you've been around there, is you got to at least get that ball rolling, right? And that is obviously so critical to at least getting just some data where you can take that data in, do something with it, make more adjustments, get more data, and obviously keep making adjustments along the way. And I've been seeing that a lot in just different. Obviously, we work with a lot of investors. We see a lot of analysis paralysis.
Mhm.
You're obviously a good example of someone that doesn't seem to have that, but you're obviously still. Well, we
I've
all
worked,
have it to some degree, right?
I've figured out how to work through it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So the paralysis can be a killer here. What I wanted to ask was about this lighthearted living formula. I didn't get into the definition of it, but I wanted you to kind of share a little bit about what exactly is this formula and how can I want to at least give some value to the audience on what this formula is that maybe you kind of came up with. Maybe how it's kind of maybe we're implementing some of it already in our daily lives, but yeah, share a little bit about that.
Sure, sure. Well, I figured out that I noticed that a lot of times we suffer because we're ignoring parts of ourselves. So my generation and a lot of people I know, we are, you know, overachiever people pleasers, for example.
Yep.
So a lot of us went all in on the mind, like how do I, work the most? Like all my health concerns, all my health questions were about how do I be superhuman so I could work more, which is clearly not a healthy approach to it. So I noticed, especially the wonder part, I noticed that the clients were just trying to be machines in some ways. And I noticed that in myself. So I went through a whole discovery with myself and then with other people, of course. But for me, the wonder came through my gratitude practice, which led to the poem, which led to my publishing mini empire that I have now. So, so the lighthearted living formula is wonder, wellness, and wisdom. Now, these are the full expression of mind, body, and spirit that we're used to. Because to really thrive, a lot of times people come with the symptoms. There's something wrong with my relationship, or I don't know what to do at work, or I'm unsatisfied. What they're really asking, I realized, is how do I be present? Or how do I prioritize? How do I not be overwhelmed? That's really like the bottom line. And it turns out that wonder, wonder, when you connect to wonder, it handles the how not to be overwhelmed. The wellness is how am I present? The answer is wellness. And then how do I prioritize? That's where the wisdom comes in. So it starts like working with these because I find that this provides sustainable balance. And I noticed that in myself because I really was just all brain. So I had to take martial arts. I had to get hit in the face to be present to realize, oh my God, I've got to understand how to use my body in an effective way. And then I really figured out the wisdom I thought because I analyzed things that my mind was, was my biggest asset. But it turns out that it is not enough just to understand things. Things need to be workshopped. So with my workaholism, for example, I had to really pay attention to that so that I'm working smart and not hard. So that's a lot of like what the wisdom piece is about. And then what I've noticed is it starts with identifying the things that inspire wonder in you, curiosity, love, wellness. How do you take best care of yourself so that you can express yourself how you want to? And then the wisdom has to do with how we view the world, our mindset, our habits. What are we actually doing with ourselves? So there's one thing, like the first layer is identifying these things. So for example, gratitude is a really special one because it really fits into all three: wonder, wellness, and wisdom. And what's also cool about wonder, wellness, and wisdom, it's not just the destination of what we want, but it's also the pathway of achieving it. So in a more advanced level, you want to know, how are you expressing wonder, wellness, and wisdom? And it doesn't have to take forever. So I do my morning routine almost like an accordion. If I have more time, fantastic. But if I don't, I have these key things that really help me wake up my brain, connect, move my body, and then get myself centered before I start my day. For me, it's really easy. It's before I go downstairs. Before I go downstairs, and then it's family time, feeding the dogs, getting the kids to school, all that stuff. I have to be centered before that happens. So I figured a way how to do this, and then I have one of the biggest things I talk about is inner work is necessary, but it doesn't have to be painful. So the framework of the lighthearted living formula provides that. And then there's other things like looking at life through movie making mindset, through the lens of filmmaking. Also, there's something I call the theme park of experience, which is seeing your life and what you focus on, almost like the real estate in a theme park. So these are fun ways to face ourselves and deal with ourselves so that it doesn't feel like another chore, or it doesn't have to be unpleasant. It's necessary, but it doesn't have to be unpleasant. And it's better to do it consciously so that, you know, things don't happen like getting sick or accidents where it's like forced reflection.
So I want to bring up something that you brought up earlier, and I think just briefly, it was journaling. Um, so about journaling, at least in my business, this is just my personal testimony. My business didn't change until I started regularly journaling at night, mornings. It was sporadic in nature, but at least I was starting to put it down on paper. And I think the audience can kind of get value of this because you're probably a little bit more, I would think, religious about it than I am. I've gotten to the point where I've started to do it every day. But really just journaling, obviously, whatever goals you may have, putting them down on paper, just because when you're putting them on paper, at least what I've learned is you're starting to put things on the table and mapping out a real plan, right, Macarena? Share a little bit about what you have done, and I'm not quite sure to what degree you have done that, but I just know journaling has just been a huge, tremendous boost in anything I've done, just because it's really allowed the chess pieces to be put on a table. It's really allowed, at least myself, my team, to be able to at least we start setting those goals. There, we put obviously a priority. What's a priority? What's not a priority? But if you put on a paper, I have these 10 goals here, and you're looking at that. Obviously, I'm referring mostly to personal goals, but I think doing this with your team, if someone who's listening to this, they own a business, applying that in a different way, whether it be on a whiteboard for their team to see, it seemed to have a tremendous value. But share anything that you might have experienced with just your journaling and previously.
I love this question. And this speaks to the concept of things need to be workshopped. It's not enough to know. I feel like what I help provide people is really implementation. So there's what I find is really there's different types of journaling. And I come to it as needed because I know it works. So I'm not perfect about it. I'm not trying to be either, but it is a such an amazing tool. So there's different types of journaling. So that AM journal, the idea is that as soon as you wake up in the morning, you write down whatever's in your mind. It's almost like a mind dump, or I woke up thinking of this song, or this is what I dreamed about. But what I noticed, so I'm going to talk about something that I call the daily debrief, which I think is really, really important. That happens at the end of the day. When I don't do the daily debrief, I noticed that my morning journal was almost like my itinerary of what happened the day before. So I learned, Julia Cameron talks about it, but it was a producing mentor who told me, I was, I don't know, 24 years old and full of energy and I wanted to do everything. So she's like, get a notebook in the morning, just write 3 pages of whatever's in your head. If it's nothing, it's just, I have nothing, blah, 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 I have nothing until allow it to come. So what that does is it makes space. And I don't want people to get hung up on journaling. It doesn't matter if you're auditory, speak to a voice memo. It doesn't matter how you do this. I think there is value in writing, but not everybody's into it. But the point is, these things are really beneficial however you do them. If you like to type, type. If you like to talk to a recorder, talk to a recorder. It doesn't matter. The point is giving yourself space. Okay, what's happening in my brain? Let me let it out. And that alone is a huge key to overwhelm and setting like the day in the right order. So that's almost like just a brain dump that happens in the morning, that get everything out of your head so you could be clear, right? Set the stage for your day. What I like to do is at the end of the day, I call it the daily debrief. There's something really powerful about accounting what happened, because let's say something negative, something you didn't like happened. If you write it down, it's almost like you're doing the accounting of it. You're making some separation. You're putting it in its, it's almost in its place. And there's many ways to do this. It doesn't really matter. You could do it on your notes. You could even do it on a planner that has like where you can write on each day. That's how I like to do it. Like, okay, if anything negative happened, okay, what happened? What was my contribution to that drama, and what I think is possible. And what's cool about doing it like that, you could always review a month later. Okay, what happened, or when did that happen? And then a year later, and then it really builds resilience. Like, yes, I was really disappointed about that, but guess what? I got over it like really quickly and completely forgot about that I was upset about that. So it gives you a way of having some resilience. Then by reflecting on the day, you can say, okay, what worked, what didn't work. I think the questions we ask ourselves are really powerful, but just the allowing of, okay, what worked for me today, what didn't work for me. I liked more of that. I want more of that universe. I want less of this, is really, really, really powerful. And this daily debrief. So I had a client who couldn't sleep. He's very creative. And I said, okay, instead of just journaling, you can doodle. If you're a doodler, doodle as you're reflecting through your day. There's no wrong way to do this. I think this is really, really important. And a lot of times we get hung up on stuff. I remember when I took like TM meditation, but what about this? And it's like, all meditation is good. Like you can't get it wrong. So this is really important to know. There's no wrong way of doing this. It's whatever works for you, and you have to play with it to figure out what is sustainable and what is enriching to you. So I said, at the end of the day, he's in charge. He's a very powerful guy in charge of a lot of stuff. Just doodle to clear your mind before going to sleep. And he's sleeping problem solved. Didn't have to take medication, didn't have to do anything. So he likes both the AM and the PM, because I find that if you don't do the PM, sometimes it will muddle your AM one. So, I've gone in and out of all of this. I do this as needed. There's time when things are more intense. So the important thing is be kind to yourself. How can you take better care of yourself? And how does journaling fit into that? And then, we work with people. The more clear everyone is, the more clear we show up, the better leaders we can be for our teams, for our businesses. So that's a thing. I really find like I've done enough inner work where my life is usually magical. But when it's not, it's like, okay, what's going on? And not what the question is not what is wrong with me or what did I do wrong? It's okay, where can I take better care of myself? Because
Mhm.
if I'm not showing up present, something's off, you know, and sometimes it's let's say one time it was really funny. It was like the Twilight Zone. I was at Whole Foods and was having a really bad day, and everybody's like, "What is happening with you? Like, this is so weird, like so out of character." And I said, "I don't know what's going on with me." And then I realized my mom's birthday was coming up, and I think it was like 2 or 3 years after she'd passed, and I hadn't given myself enough time to be or even acknowledge that it was coming up. So it was like the week before, and my subconscious started acting crazy where I had to stop and be like, okay, what's going on with me? And then it was like, oh my God, I'm grieving. My mom's birthday's coming up and I haven't thought about it and I need to make space for that. So as soon as I understood that, back to normal, everything was fine. So we constantly need to be working with ourselves to ask, what do we need? How can we take the best care of ourselves possible so we can show up?
So people, I what I've seen over, and you've seen this from your clients, your friends, your family, people love putting roadblocks in front of them, right? They don't mean to do it, but they just love to create these invisible roadblocks. And I've kind of seen this over again, whether it's they're just so used, obviously, their cycle of maybe watching the news, putting that information in, and it doesn't seem to do anything for them. Obviously, they find that they're getting value, but unfortunately, in reality, they're not really getting value if they're looking to obviously create some type of impact and maybe starting a business in their existing business or in their existing career. What have you kind of seen, Macarena, as if some of your clients that you've seen that they want to go out and do something on their own, they're creating these roadblocks. How do they overcome these obstacles? Because it's not easy at first. If you've done it before, then you've kind of created your own map basically to kind of get back to that goal. How do you kind of have people kind of jump, for example, maybe people jumping out of their they want to jump out of their corporate career like you did. What is really the steps it takes to kind of get there?
That's a great question. I I think it starts with being super clear as to why. And sometimes if we start feeling uncomfortable in a job, it's because I ask this question when it comes to like relationship and situations, even friendships, and sometimes in like business engagements, like, is this for a reason, you know, a season or extended play, let's call it, you know, just to have some fun there. Not everything's meant to last forever. Not every job is supposed to be, even though you might have thought it was like that at the beginning. So if we are present, we can be super clear at, okay, this isn't working for me. This is a great opportunity. It's not that there's anything wrong here, but it's time for me to pivot. So to have that awareness, I do believe the inner work, the inner reflection, giving yourself time to, you know, take some breaks where you're not on your phone, where you're just staring at an empty ceiling and give yourself time to think. I think that's a really valuable skill that a lot of us are just too distracted all the time to even like being able to tune in. Then, so it starts with like being aware and then having a strong goal. So, what is your motivation? It's, you know, we can say, don't take the bait, you know, don't take the collective bait. Yes, we're part of a community and we need to be informed and involved. Sure. However, just to a certain degree, if we're being inundated and it's distracting, like for example, my husband has a much higher tolerance for external stuff. So in the morning, we decide we listen to the financial news because it's more neutral. It's not, it's a lot less dramatic than the local news. If you look at the local news, it sounds like it's really, really dangerous. Why would you want to leave your house, especially here in Miami? When thinking about where our kid should go to college, we're like, oh, let's look at the safety stuff. We're like, oh my God, the most unsafe place we live is actually here, you know? So perspective. So it's much easier to not take the bait of external things that are just distractions. Now, this is something really important. You want to journal and contemplate about what you use to distract yourself. Because a workaholic will use work to distract themselves from being present, from feeling some kind of hurt. Usually it's some variation of that. Some of us will use busyness instead of doing like the important part, like the tasks that are actually going to move the needle. We inundate ourselves. Sorry about that. We inundate ourselves with like menial tasks that are really not the highest priority. So re you hear all that? I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're
So
okay.
I say explore. It's not like, oh, I don't distract myself. We all distract ourselves. The question is how and when it comes to what. And then you can make decisions about whether you want to continue that or do something different. So to make any change, you have to be really, really clear. What is my goal? Like with me, when I left my corporate job, it was like I just felt, I can't even describe it. It was not a logic thing. It was I am suffocating. Like this has run its course. You know, that's a really good question to ask yourself. Has this run its course? And you'll get a hit in your body, yay or nay or maybe, you know? So for me, it was really clear. This has run its course. So it doesn't even matter what I'm going to go do. I have to start putting the exit plan in place here. And then I knew I had to give myself a little bit of a sabbatical. I had to, that's why I did that book to just kind of like decompress, right? So I say be super clear. It's so much easier not to be distracted. So right now with me, it would be like, I've got I've I've created a lot of books. So now I'm at the point where what is the best delivery system of this to help the most people possible? And that's where like the book of the month club came. So now when people ask me certain things and I'm doing for grown-ups, I've got my common clarity course. I get, you know, we all have a lot of opportunities coming our way. But because I'm very clear on what my main goals are, it's so much easier for me to navigate and say no to things and say, not right now. This is not, you know, you also have to be, I think, really protective of your time and not just your time, your focus. I realized that I used to suffer about time. I want more time. I wish I had more time. But I realized my productivity is not based on time. It's actually based on the quality of my focus. So I have focus usually in the beginning of my day from 9 to 12. I have other writers. We get together on a Discord server. We tune in and then we say, okay, what are you working on? What are you working on? Great. Have fun. I don't have meetings. I do my all my errands on a Friday where I have to run around. I try not to run around the rest of the time. And then in the afternoons, after I have lunch, now that we're both, my husband and I both work from home, we have lunch together. It's sacred time. Then in the afternoon is when I can record my podcast. I can be guests in other podcasts. That's when I have some room to connect. So been very, very, very deliberate, but it's much easier to have these kinds of boundaries when you know why you're doing what you're doing and what is the purpose, what is your goal. So discipline comes after you have a clear goal. And if you don't have a clear goal, take some time, go on walks, distract yourself less, and give yourself time to think. Sometimes people find it easier to do that while journaling. Sometimes people need to talk. You know, you can have a friend and say, hey, I just need you to listen. I've got to talk this out to somebody to, you know, so I can figure it out. And then, of course, there's professional help, which I'm a big fan of.
So, Macarena, I wish we had more time. You hit so many things on the head. The clarity. I'm so glad you got a little more granular on the journaling. So, what's nice is that I got one more question for you. Then my engineer says we got a little bit more time. So, so what my kind of my last question was, it was kind of dealing with the and going back to the mindset thing here. We were taught. I think you kind of have your life sectioned off. You very organized, and I think that's a one big thing that I've seen a lot of people, at least other investors that I'm working with. We work with local investors here in Washington State, Portland area. We help them with different real estate matters, things of that nature. But the clients that you're working with, how have you kind of been able to kind of get them over that hump? We talked about kind of the roadblocks that they might mentally set there, but the people who are really busy, what are some of your tips maybe on organizing here? Because as we kind of wrap up here, I wanted to kind of give you kind of time to maybe share with. I think a lot of the people who are starting their company, they're not maybe the most organized people. That's what I've kind of seen here. You're probably a good example of someone that's figured out a way to do it with certain tools out there. But I noticed the people who have the corporate background, they have that skill set somehow built in already. I myself, I never graduated from college. I dropped out 20 years ago. I ended up joining the military. Now I'm in a position where it took much longer to get there. But coming from the corporate side of things, what has been your secret to kind of organizing your life? You've said a lot of that already, but try to encapsulate that just for our audience a little bit better, because I think that is one thing that we there's all these apps available on our app store, using different mobile tools, but in the reality is, until you really know how to use that and have a general framework on how to do that, it's really hard to get some of these goals off, basically to first base, to second base, where you really start obviously seeing some of those improvements. But talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so flexibility is the key to our success. I used to say this all the time. I feel very fortunate that I think I'm like half and half, logic, creative. I'm really, I think, evenly split when it comes to those things. And I know most people lean more to one or the other. So the schedule is not set in stone. I work better with the schedule blocks. I've
Mm.
tried to schedule myself, you know, and then it was really funny. I mean, I've scheduled movies, talk about having to like take resources and figure out how you're going to do the impossible in a minute at a time and give yourself opportunities so the magic can happen and all that good stuff. So I used to suffer a lot about the schedule. And my friends, everybody used to be like, oh, you're so good at it. You're so good at it. And then a friend of mine saw through it and said, if you're always overwhelmed, I don't think you're good at this at all. And it was like, ooh, he called me out.
Mm.
He was right. Even though most people thought, oh, you're so good at this. I suffered. I suffered a lot, but I had to get honest with myself. I think you have to do like the inner work, some inner development, and see how do you function. Are you a morning person? Are you a night person? I talk, one of the frameworks I talk about is set for success. You have to take a little time to think about how you set yourself up for success. So for me, it came with suffering because I had very little time. We had, illness in the family. My husband had an extremely stressful job. It was crazy. I was being pulled from, there were construction people in the house. So when I looked at, I think it's really important to get like a calendar or a spreadsheet or however, do it on paper and figure out, okay, sleep, self-care, family time, meals. When you take all that out, there's really like um, not that much time. There's really not that much time. So I had to like be honest with, even though I want to do everything, I have to pick and choose. I have to prioritize and I have to use my time wisely. So then it became, instead of like, what's the most I can do? It's how do I take care of myself so I could show up and focus? I think that's kind of like the most important thing. You know, you have to play around, you have to figure out what works for you. I'm almost allergic to the word discipline. There's something called the Enneagram, which is, I'm not sure if you've done it, but turns out I tested more like an 8, like a more of a challenger, like a leader type. But that's really my defense mechanism. I'm really a 7, which is an enthusiast, which means I find everything interesting, which has, it's that's not all sunny either. It's very, very distracting. So I had to own that. Okay, I am easily distracted.
Mhm.
What do I need so that I allow myself the focus? And then, it's only like the last year that I've implemented, since an author mastermind, that I implemented that schedule I told you, but it's made such a big difference. And not only that, in not just my productivity, but my inner wellness and not being as overwhelmed, because I make space for things and then I know when to like let it go and
That's
reschedule.
yeah, no, that makes sense. So you're obviously putting it to paper. So no, that makes sense there. I was just thinking of this. There's this I don't know. Have you heard of Jesse Itzler? He's
Yes.
married to Sarah
Love
Blakely.
him.
Yeah, he has this rule about, and I just saw this. I saw him speak at a conference about scheduling family life, and what he does is most entrepreneurs, they seem to schedule their family life around their business life. What he does is he gets together with his wife, his family, and say, what are the family events we got going on this year? So I think he plans his year out ahead of time. You obviously have to when you're Jesse Itzler and Sarah Blakely. Obviously, they got to make time for their Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Hawks NBA. They own. They're minority owners of the NBA team, Atlanta Hawks. So back to that, they schedule their family life first, but then they insert the business into there. And most people do it the other way around. They fit family in at the end there. So I thought that was so important that get your family in first, right onto the calendar first. What are the big events there? Then you insert your business around there. So Macarena, we're I guess kind of just out of time there. I wanted to say I really kind of appreciate you, and I wanted to kind of find out what is the best way everyone can get a hold of you. I think you said some of your books might be available on Amazon, correct?
Yes, but
Yeah.
the quality does not match like the quality of my Shopify, okay, of my direct
Yeah.
store. My printer is way, way better. So my website is macarenaluzbianchi.com, and I'm sure you'll put it someplace.
We'll put in the description. Uh-huh.
That's great because yeah, it's a mouthful. So I don't want to spell it out. But my website, that's like my center point. And then I'm in most social media. So wherever you are, I'm sure you can find me, usually under Macarena Luz B or Spark Social Press. That's how people can find me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, guys, look her up. Obviously, I've kind of checked Macarena, and yeah, I just appreciate kind of your candid uh, um, way you look at life, and I think that journey from corporate was going to be really valuable to the audience here. So, otherwise, yeah, look forward to seeing you next time, Macarena.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. All the best.
All right, take care.